Good morning, everyone. This is your host, Piyush Chandak, and today I feel excited and thrilled to welcome you to the second episode of the Roadways to Robotics seminar organized by IEEE Student Branch, Acropolis Institute. In this seminar, as in the last episode, we wish to gain insights about the field of robotics, its future, and the learning platforms available for students. Also, we aim to share knowledge about careers in the field of robotics. As our speaker today, we have with us Mr. Dennis Kambeitz, all the way from Calgary, Canada. Mr. Dennis is the founder and CEO of Robots.Education. He has spoken at numerous national and international conferences as a robotics educator and a keynote speaker. He has impacted more than 15,000 educators and government officials, helping them understand the changes that robotics and AI will bring to the workforce and how we can best prepare our students for the transformation. His organization, Robots.Education, has worked with the world's leading educational technologies for STEM and robotics, including EZ Robot, LittleBits, Dash and Dot, Microbits, and MakerBot. Sir, we are extremely glad to have you with us today. I would also like to share with our audience that between Calgary, Canada, and India, there's a 12 and a half hour time difference. So, sir is actually waiting for us in the late night, and we are extremely grateful to have him and to share his precious time with us. Also, I would like to invite Head of Department, Electronics and Communication Department, Dr. UBS Chandrawat, for welcoming our speaker.
Am I audible, Piyush?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very good morning to everyone present here. Under the banner of IEEE Student Chapter, we have been conducting so many activities to make students aware about the upcoming technologies. And today it's matter of great pleasure and honor for all of us that we have Mr. Danish Kambeitz in between us. He's a renowned technocrat and quite vibrant in area of robotics. Robotic engineers are the bridge between the mechanics, electronics, and computer science. And another important area is cognitive psychology. So it's a really interdisciplinary field, and it's in demand. So many jobs are created in area of robotics, and in upcoming decade, there would be not a lot of jobs in all areas in area of robotics. A robotic engineer creates robots and that are able to perform duties that humans are either unable or prefer not to complete. Robotic science has a tremendous scope as a career option, as robots play an important role in the industrial sector. They help in speeding up the process of manufacturing and finds tremendous applications in the fields of nuclear science, exploration of sea, designing of biomedical equipment. A robotic engineer takes care of all the aspects of creating a robot, such as robot designing, maintenance, testing, and proper functioning. The coming decade is defined by the largest workforce transition in the history of mankind. Millions of jobs will be lost to technology, while millions of new jobs will be created. Perhaps more importantly, the vast majority of remaining jobs will be transformed and applicants with robotic literacy and strong technical skills will have a significant advantage when applying for jobs across virtually all industries. So it's really an upcoming area, and upcoming decade would be devoted to this technology. So it's really a matter of great pleasure for us that today we have Mr. Dennis Kambeitz in between us to apprise us about the development in this particular field. On behalf of Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering, I welcome to Mr. Dennis Kambeitz in today's session, and I welcome all audience, and I urge all audience to make this session more and more useful, interactive, and involvement of all students is required to make this session successful. Thank you so much. Over to you, Piyush.
Thank you, sir. Your welcome and introduction definitely highlighted the importance of robotics and how disruptive this field would be in our future. So, without taking further time, I would like to invite our speaker, Mr. Dennis, to proceed with the session.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the IEEE Student Branch in Acropolis for the opportunity to talk here today. And of course, also to thank all of you for tuning in to listen to my presentation on the impact that robotics and AI is going to have on the workforce, what we can do to prepare society for that. I recognize that I'm talking to a bunch of people that are already psychologically invested in robotics. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to start by talking a little bit about my history. I don't come inherently from a robotics background. I've been doing this for close to a decade now. My background is in communications. And the way that I got into robotics was I had a company and I had a programmer working for me. We were building a massive web app. And this programmer, in his spare time, was developing a robotics platform that was quite revolutionary. And it has evolved into this guy here. But one of the interesting things is when he started building this platform close to a decade ago, he did it by hacking a Wall-E toy. And so every few days he would come into the office and he would, he'd say like, look, my Wall-E can drive around the room without crashing into things. And I thought that was pretty cool, but I was like, I mean, that's neat, but I was like, kind of thing, right? And so then a couple of days later, it's like, look, I can have a conversation with my robot. And this is close to a decade ago. So, I mean, those things are revolutionary now. A decade ago, they were unbelievable. And I didn't really understand at that time what I was looking at because I was seeing a Wall-E toy. And I didn't recognize that inside of the Wall-E toy was a super powerful robotics platform that was being born. So what had happened is he was publishing these videos and people were excited about his robotics platform. And they would, hit him on YouTube and say, hey, I love what your robot can do. Can I get one of your boards? So he'd say, sure, and he'd solder it up and then he'd sell it for $100 or whatever price it was at that time. And so that started to happen a couple times a week, then 7 or 8 times a week, then a couple or 3 times a day. And I started to go, uh-oh, I'm going to lose my programmer, right? But he had a real passion for robotics, and he had been fantastic working with me on my company. So I wanted to reciprocate and help him. We worked very long hours and to become friends. I wanted to reciprocate and help him as much as I could to grow his company. So at that time, I started to do some research into robotics, and I started to understand the unprecedentedly large impact that robotics and artificial intelligence was going to have on the workforce. And so I started to say, wow, like there's a major change coming. And looking at what your platform can do, it would probably be great in education. So I said to him, I'll go have some conversation with some educators about your robotics platform, see if that would be a good fit. Because what we knew was it was significantly more powerful than Lego, easier to use, more powerful than pretty much any platform that was being used in education, but also incredibly easy. And so I went and I did a presentation for my local school board. And I still remember I had a 3D printed prototype. And in that first presentation, I had 4 teachers that were teaching with Lego and a couple that were teaching with Vex. And my presentation actually got paused for about 10 minutes when the Lego instructors were saying, like, where can we sell our Lego to get into these guys? And then I found out later that the Vex instructor told one of the organizers of the event that he felt kind of odd going back into the classroom because this platform changed everything. And so at that point in time, I was like, okay, I started to understand that there's this massive change coming, and we've got an excellent product that can make a difference within education. So then I started talking to educators to see if they understood the changes that were coming and what they needed to do to prepare their students. And my early findings were that it was largely misunderstood. and I mean, in many cases, completely misunderstood or unaware. Remember, this is 8 years ago. So 8 years ago, I would talk to people about how self-driving cars were going to come, and people were like, what's a self-driving car? That kind of sets the stage for where people were in their knowledge about this new technology. And so as I started to understand that educators didn't know what they were doing, I kind of put my company on the shelf and started Robots.Education with a mission to try to get robotics education to as many kids as possible, and adults. But really, I was focused at that time on K-12 education. And the reason for that is I really believe that any student that does not have robotics literacy and AI literacy is going to be significantly, dangerously disadvantaged within the next 5 to 10 years. And so I started talking to educators. To date, I've talked to about 20,000 educators, and the number of educators who have told me that they're confident, they know what they need to do to prepare their students, has been less than 50. Some of these people are ministries of education, superintendents, principals, curriculum directors, again, mostly K-12. But what we find is everybody knows robotics is coming, everybody knows artificial intelligence is coming, but they don't understand the global impact it's going to have. So what I'd like to do is share with you the information that I share with educators to help them understand the scope of what is coming, because it's unprecedentedly large, and it paints a picture where if we don't start to get this education to all of our kids, we're going to be in significant trouble. So the place that I like to start when I'm talking to the educators is, and this certainly is easier in an auditorium full of people, because I'll actually ask questions and they'll answer. But the first question I always ask is, or I'll say I want to run through 3 or 4 big industries, 3 or 4 of the biggest industries, and see if people understand what's coming in them. The first one I always start with is transportation. And I'll say, has anyone thought about the impact of self-driving vehicles? And they will say, visually impaired people will be able to get around. You'll be able to text while driving. People could potentially be working while driving, so maybe your commute becomes billable time for your company. They talk about reduced traffic congestion, reduced parking demand because your car could drop you off and drive home. They talk about visually impaired people being able to get around, a wide range of social implications. But certainly early on, and still today, the one that's missed largely is the economic impact. And if we have self-driving vehicles, do we need truck drivers? No. Bus drivers? No. Cab drivers? No. Uber drivers? No. So all of those careers are scheduled for deletion. And what I'm going to do at the beginning of this presentation is talk about the job loss and the job change, and then I'll talk in the second half about the job creation and the new opportunities, because it's really important to understand both sides. But when we think about those 4 jobs, there's a lot of people that typically work in the transportation industry, and those people, once those jobs go away, what do those people do to find new jobs? Because there's an important distinction that is going to happen over this next decade when we talk about job loss. What we're really talking about is job elimination, right? Once truck driving jobs go away, they're not coming back. Once bus driving jobs go away, they're not coming back. So if you've been a truck driver for the last 20 years, you need to think about what you can do to support yourself and your family, and you need to start thinking about that and training for that today. I recognize that a lot of people in the audience aren't in that position, but it's important to understand the larger scope. And so what I like to do is I like to say, okay, so the forecast for the next 10 years is that robotics and artificial intelligence will eliminate 20 to 40% of jobs. Eliminate. That is tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people globally that are going to lose their employment. But let's think about it from just one person's perspective. If you were a truck driver for 20 years, most truck drivers, like most adults, I'm not picking on truck drivers, most adults don't, kind of sharpen the axe or get new skills in the evening after their workday because they're tired from their workday, and then they're raising their children and doing whatever else. So most people that are driving a truck haven't been preparing for their next career. So let's say it's a Tuesday afternoon, the truck driver loses their job, they come home, they sit down on the couch, and they say, now what? What skills does a truck driver have in the new economy that is very tech-centric? What skills does a truck driver have to get a job? And the answer is probably not a lot. So then it's like, okay, what kind of job can a truck driver get without any high-tech skills? And I'll ask educators this question. And then an answer that comes back most often is maybe they could go work in the restaurant industry. And I'll say, okay, that's a good suggestion because that doesn't require a lot of high-tech skills to be a server or a busboy or a waiter. There's some chef duties that they could do without a lot of high-tech skills. So that's a possibility. But now let's look at what's happening in the restaurant industry. If you've been in a McDonald's recently, there's a very, very high chance that you've ordered your food on a touch screen. At the McDonald's by my house, there used to be 4 or 5 people on the front counter, 2 shifts a day, so 8 to 10 people. Now there's 1 person per shift and 4 touch screens. So that, if we say 1 person per shift, now there's 2. There used to be 8 to 10. So let's say that's, a reduction of 7 people per shift. In the USA, and I'm not sure what the statistics are in India or in other countries. In the USA, there's 15,000 McDonald's restaurants. That's 100,000 jobs that don't exist today that existed 2 years ago. And the next thing up at restaurants, and now that McDonald's has proven that strategy or that model will work, we're starting to see other stores put it in, other restaurants put it in. And so and this is a really important thing to understand about this transition we are going through. Once one company proves it works, every other company will follow suit as fast as they can. Because if you own a Burger King or a Wendy's or an A&W or some other restaurant, you want that extra money as well. Because each person that owns a McDonald's might save $150,000 or $200,000 for not having all those staff and having the touch screen instead. If you've spent $1 million to buy a McDonald's, you want that, that extra revenue to pay back your investment. This is not a commentary on McDonald's. I have no axe to grind. That's just indicative because they've done it. But it's indicative of the kind of changes that are going to happen everywhere. And I don't want to present myself as an expert on McDonald's. It's possible that my statistics are slightly out, but the concept is solid. Okay, so it's important to understand these things are coming. Now, what else is happening at restaurants around the world is robotic chefs are starting to be introduced, right? So that's another way that restaurants and hospitality is shrinking. There are robotic coffee shops already in Europe and in the USA, probably in India as well, in places like convention centers and airports and stuff. And all of these things, they're only taking away a few jobs at each place, but they're reducing the number of people that can find entry-level work, low technical skill work, right? And so there's a restaurant in China, apparently, that is entirely run with robots, including shipping and receiving. So if that proves to be successful, other restaurants will follow suit, right? And this is a little bit of business here, a little business management or economics. It's important to understand, because a lot of times when I say this, like if I talk about a robotic coffee shop, I'll have people in the audience say, I don't want to get my coffee from a robot, I want to get it from a person. And I'll say, awesome. But economics being what it is, if this company has a cup of coffee for $3, and this company over here has robots and a cup of coffee for $2, and the coffee is exactly right every time, a bunch of people are going to choose this company. Whether or not an individual doesn't really matter, because a bunch of people will. And this company, if they lose 10 or 20 or 30% of their customers, this company's in trouble, right? So we're going to start to see these changes happening in all industries. So the hospitality sector can't absorb the transportation sector because the hospitality sector is also contracting in terms of low technical skill labor. Right now, the hospitality sector has jobs for people that can service robotic chefs or make robotic chefs, can program the touch screen, high-tech jobs, different type of jobs. The people that are losing their jobs don't have the skills needed to take these new jobs. So we're going to see a massive pivot. So now we're talking about people from transportation that have lost their employment. We're adding into that pile of unemployment with the hospitality sector. So I'll say, okay, what industry can absorb both of those sectors? And the answer I will often get back is, maybe retail. But brick and mortar retail, so physical stores retail, that's contracting in terms of the number of people it needs as well. You have self-checkouts, right? And those were introduced in North America probably 10 or 12 years ago. They weren't extremely popular back then, so they put a bunch in to test it. It was kind of okay, and then they pulled a bunch out. But now if you go into stores in North America, they all have self-checkouts. And an increasing number of self-checkouts. The Walmarts are heavily self-checkout. And so, the Walmart needs less cashiers to run than it used to. And we're going to start to see these changes. There's going to be warehouse robots. Lowe's in North America, which is a hardware store, was working on customer service robots. They're pretty impressive. I'm not sure where they are with these things, but what they can do is pretty good. And again, here's a little lesson on economics. If a company spends millions of dollars developing a robot, and they get a robot that can deliver good customer service, are they going to use that robot in just one store? Or are they going to roll it out to their 5,000 or 10,000 stores across the country or around the world? And the answer is obvious. They're going to roll that robot out in as many stores as they can, as quickly as they can. That's another thing that we have to understand. We're not seeing a lot of these changes because the work is going on behind the curtain, but companies are getting closer to the finish line. And what we're going to see is a large number of companies in a large number of industries hitting the finish line in a short period of time over the next 10 years. And that is going to have a dramatic impact on the workforce. So even though we might not be seeing these changes massively today, they're coming. But it's not just about the jobs that are going away and the new jobs that are coming. It's about how jobs are going to change. So let's go back to the example with Lowe's and talk about if you were a regional manager for a hardware store that had warehouse robots, and I don't think that Lowe's has warehouse robots yet, but I expect they will. Warehouse robots, customer service robots, self-checkouts. If you're hiring a new manager for that store, do you want to hire somebody that understands that technology or doesn't? Now, this person doesn't need to be a roboticist. They don't need to be able to program artificial intelligence, but they need to have a strong understanding of that technology. They need that literacy. Another great example of this is the fashion industry. And I love this example because when I say fashion industry, most people would go fashion designers over here, very creative, roboticists over here, very technical. I was at a robotics conference giving a keynote presentation about 6 or 7 years ago, and two important things happened in that conference. The first one, I gave my keynote presentation, and I wasn't sure how it was going to be received because I'm talking to a bunch of engineers, a bunch of roboticists, and I'm talking to them about these dramatic changes that are going to come in society, and I was curious to see how they were going to respond. Overwhelmingly, the people that came up to me to talk to me over the next few days that had seen my presentation said, I want to thank you for giving that presentation. I've never thought about that. And these are the people that are making the changes. So here's what often happens. A lot of times, a company will hire an engineer, and they'll say, here's the goal we want to get to. We're at A, we want to get to B, and they will task the engineer with going down that path. The engineer will sit there and they'll do their job, and then eventually they'll get to B. But what happens is nobody's sitting there and taking a 5,000-foot view of all the companies and all the engineers going from A to B. And this is where we're going to see huge change, because everybody is on that path to B. And as companies start getting there and reaching that goal, we're going to start to see large-scale changes. And once one company, comes up with tangible change, like, for example, McDonald's with the touchscreen ordering, all the restaurants now start to do that, right? So as soon as a technology proves itself, everybody pushes in that direction. And so we're going to start to see that happening in virtually all industries, right? So being a retail manager of a store isn't historically a high-tech career, but now it is, or it will be in the next 5 years or so. Now, I want to go back to that conference because I mentioned fashion designers. The other interesting thing that happened to me at that conference was I had conversations with 20 or 25 people from the fashion industry, and that surprised me. Remember, this goes back, 6, 7 years ago now. So I meet 2 or 3 people in an hour from the fashion industry, and I think, that's interesting. They must just have a personal interest in robotics. But you meet 4 or 5 people in an hour, and you're like, wait a second, I see a pattern. So I started asking them, I would say, you're the 5th person I've met in an hour from the fashion industry. Why are there so many of you here today? And what they told me was, if you want to get a job in the fashion industry, 2 of the most important skills are 3D printing and robotics. To be fair, they all put 3D printing first, every one of them, but they put robotics number 2. And I was surprised by that initially until I started to think about it. So let's look at this from the process, from the mindset of somebody who's hiring a new fashion designer. So suppose each of you owns a fashion design company and you're going to hire one new designer. Now let's say this circle represents all the crazy fashion that has ever been created in the history of man. It's all in there. If you add 3D printing and robotics, you can do more. You can get more innovative designs. You can get intelligent designs that will interact with the environment. If you're hiring a new designer, do you want the person that gives you this or gives you this? Where's the value? And the value comes from the person that can give you the new innovative designs, that can take advantage of new manufacturing processes with their designs. That's the designer you want. So it's important to understand that once these designers with robotics and 3D printing knowledge become available, the designers that don't have that knowledge start to have a hard time finding a job. And it's going to be that way also in education. And I love that example when I'm talking to teachers, because they don't necessarily think about teaching as a high-tech career. Obviously, for teachers that are teaching engineering, computer science, it is more high-tech, 3D printing. But for a lot of teachers, it's not. But here's an interesting thing. Knowing these changes that are coming, that we've just talked about, and lots more, what kind of teachers do we need to hire in the future to get our kids ready for the workforce? Where is the skill gap within education? And the answer is in technical education. So the kind of teachers that are going to be hired are high-tech teachers, teachers with computer science degrees that understand programming, robotics, 3D printing. Teaching itself is not necessarily a high-tech career, but the teachers whose resumes and CVs go to the top of the pile, they are going to be the high-tech teachers. And so what we're starting to see now is, okay, there's a lot of industries where these skills are becoming important, where you might not think of it. And one of the challenges that we're having today within education is we think of robotics and artificial intelligence the same way that we thought about computers in the 1970s and 80s, which was this. Some programmers would write some software that was accounting software, and they would give it to the accountants. And the accountants would say, this software is pretty incredible. Look at all these things that we can do. We're faster, we got less errors, more efficient. This is really great software. And then the programmers wrote some software for the medical industry. And the doctor said, this software is excellent. Look at how we can take care of patients better and manage their records. And so back in the 70s and 80s, we would have all said, this software looks pretty important. We are probably going to need more programmers in the future. And that was a very true statement. But what was missed was the fact that computers, while being an industry to itself, were also going to be a layer across all industries. And what we know today is if you don't have computer literacy, you are going to be significantly disadvantaged in the workplace. You're going to have way less opportunity. And we're going to see the same thing happen with robotics and artificial intelligence. They're going to be layers across all industries. Now, the interesting thing is that means that all children and all adults need this literacy. They need this education to be competitive in the new world. So what I like to do when I'm talking to educators, and I just like to pass this along to you as well, is I like to talk about, okay, how are we doing within education? Now, I've demonstrated robotics to more than 18,000 students. So I know my presentations are very effective. I'll give some stats on the kind of engagement we see, how many kids we get to want to learn robotics. I'll give those stats in a second. I've also talked to 20,000 educators. So I know, in most countries, what the level of enthusiasm is for kids. And I'm going to show you what that is. I'm going to draw a bell curve of engineering mindedness. So over here on the left side of the bell curve, all the students down here don't love engineering. They're into creative, the humanities, the arts, literature, drama, music, those types of things. Over here, you've got the people that love engineering, physics, right? And in the middle, you've got the masses. Now, these, and again, I'm not familiar with exactly what these stats would be in India, but in North America, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, here's what the stats are. At the high school level, the number of students who are interested in learning robotics, and I know that a bunch of you are already there, is 3% of boys, 0.3% of girls. Now imagine, this is 3 girls out of 1,000 at the high school level that are interested in learning robotics, 30 boys out of 1,000. Imagine the world as it's going to look in 5 to 10 years, and 3 girls out of 1,000 are learning robotics. 30 boys out of 1,000. And I will talk to a lot of high school principals, and they will say to me, we have an incredible robotics program. We finished 3rd in the country, 3rd in the province, whatever it might be, in the competitions that they were doing. And I will say, and I really mean this, congratulations, that's fantastic. You must be very proud of your students and of your instructor. To achieve such a high level of success is fantastic. How many kids do you have in your program, in your robotics club? And they will say 35. And I'll say, so you have about 2,000 kids in your school? And they'll say, yeah, that's right. How did you know? And I'll say, well, it's usually about 3% of boys, 0.3% of girls. So I'll say, do you have any girls in your club? And it's usually 1 or 2 to 6. It's in that range, but it averages out at about 0.3. And so I'll talk to that high school principal or secondary school principal, and I'll say, that's awesome. And I'll explain all the information I've just explained to you. And I'll say, what you're doing is awesome. Don't stop doing it, because these kids need the very best education they can. We have to make them as incredible as they can be so they can make innovations that will do wonderful things for the world. Keep doing what you're doing. But what are you doing for all of these other kids? And that's really when I started to get into this, that was my focus, right? It's not just about reaching these students here, you know, and this is kind of funny because when I'm talking to regular educators, like at the high school level or primary school level, my comment will be these kids here, the ones that are going to go into engineering, they're going to go off to university and get a great education and get great jobs already. So we still want them to be as awesome as they can be. We want to give them this education and push them as high as possible. But when we think about society and how it's going to function with all of these people that have lost their jobs, the jobs that mostly are going away initially are over here. These are the kids that desperately need this education, and it's the ones that don't get it when we teach robotics in a way that is too engineering minded at the beginning. We want to get the kids the engineering education. We just need to put a couple of rungs on the ladder that are a little bit lower to bring them all in. And we have to find a way to engage them. Now at the middle school level, so middle school, that would be early secondary school. So we're talking about 13 to 15-year-olds in that range. The number of kids that are interested in learning robotics goes between 15%, usually at the high end, 5% at the low end. Now, again, I've demonstrated robotics to more than 18,000 kids from inner city poor schools where the students almost spend no time on computers because they don't have them in the school. So I've demonstrated in those types of schools. I've demonstrated in private schools, everywhere in between, in the prairies, in the major cities, everywhere. The level of kids that we get interested in learning robotics, the way we teach it, at the high school level is 25 to 45%. And we can do this consistently. So imagine we can go from 3 girls out of 1,000 to 300 or 450 girls out of 1,000 wanting to learn this. And again, I'm not sure exactly what the education looks like in India, but everywhere else I've done these presentations, those numbers are very solid. At the middle school level, we get 90%. Now that's a number that helps everybody. And an interesting thing is when we start to get that many people this knowledge, the people over here, they're dreamers, they're environmentalists, they're painters, they're doctors, they're all kinds of different personalities over here. And it's important that we reach as many of them as possible. I did a presentation in a school once. I was there doing some training. They had bought some of our robots, so I was training a teacher and a few students. And the principal came in and I said, if you want, I'd be happy to give a presentation kind of like this to your kids. And so they made a general announcement, hey, any classes that want to go down to the theater, this guy's here, he's going to do a robotics presentation, you're welcome to go. So I did my presentation. At the end of my presentation, somebody came up to me, or a teacher came up to me, and she thanked me for the presentation, and she told me that she was teaching a psychology class at the time. And so she asked the students, do you want to go to this presentation? And the students said yes. And I said, I'm kind of surprised by that, because usually psychology students are over here. I said, why did they want to come? And she said their concern was, will their jobs be eliminated by this technology? And so therapists, psychologists. And my response back to that was, yes, artificial intelligence will replace some call centers, some suicide hotlines and stuff, because the artificial intelligence will be as good as people, and in some cases better. It will be able to detect micro breathing and micro changes in the length of time between words and phrases that can be predictors of certain types of behavior or mindset. So the artificial intelligence will probably be able to do a better job in some ways than the people at doing crisis intervention. But what I told her also was, think about all these people that are going to be losing their jobs, all of these people that are going to have to upskill to get new skills if you're managing a retail store and stuff, and the people that are getting displaced by this technology. we're going to see a real challenge, I believe, in the next 5 years. And I hate to say this because COVID has been so hard, and I know India is being hit so hard with it right now. We'll come out of COVID, and that'll be good. But then we're only going to get a bit of a reprieve, and then there's going to be a whole bunch of information coming about how robotics and AI is going to disrupt the workforce. And here's an important thing to understand. If you live down here as a student and you think that robotics isn't for you, and you keep hearing a message of how robotics is going to change the workforce, you start to feel like you don't have a place in the future. And so we're going to see a significant amount of depression and social emotional challenges with people that are going to be disenfranchised and feel like they don't belong in the world, right? So it's critically important that we try to get this education and this understanding to as many people. And I want you guys to all understand this, because you've all got friends in different programs at university. You've all got family members. It's important that we understand these changes that are coming, because we have time to prepare today. In 5 years' time, we don't, right? And these changes need to be across all of society. I have a son who has just completed a 2-year business management degree or diploma at a college, and he's going back for another 2 years to get his degree. And we talked to a number of different universities and colleges before he decided where he wanted to go. So he wanted to go into business management. So I talked to as many profs and instructors as I could. And I know you guys are in a different position right now because your profs understand this technology and the impact it's going to have. But here's an interesting thing. None of the professors or instructors that I talked to that are teaching business courses had any knowledge about these changes that are coming. These changes are only a few years away. If you're going into the first year of university and you're going to be in university for 4 or 5 years, when you come out, you may be graduating into a world that is very different, into a workplace that doesn't look like what it looks like today. And so if you have this robotics and AI literacy, imagine you go in for an interview and a job and you can talk about all these future technologies and nobody in the company understands those things, but they know where they're important. Are you more likely or less likely to get that job? This is like the fashion designer I was talking about. Once these people become available with the technical knowledge, the ones who only have the specific skills for their craft stop getting jobs. Everybody needs to understand this. And if I was a university, I would try to have all of my instructors and professors getting this literacy quickly and integrating this into their courses. And that's the same thing I try to teach at the high school level. I want social studies teachers, physics, biology, chemistry, English language arts. I want all of them to understand what's coming and to start to infuse technology into their teaching. If you're at the high school level and you're teaching culinary arts, that's at least over here what we call, if you want to become a chef, it's culinary arts. If you're teaching culinary arts to high school students, you need to understand that there's going to be robotics in the kitchen in many restaurants. Probably not all of them, but in many restaurants. Because a robot can know 2,000 recipes or 100,000 recipes. It can make them all. It can make them all perfectly every time, right? And so that's not to say that all chefs will be replaced or musicians will be replaced. There's going to be a huge demand still for people. But if you have this literacy, you're advantaged no matter what career you want to go in. And this is an important part of what I try to teach children when they're still younger is, even if you think that robotics is gross today, if you can get this understanding, it's going to make you advantaged in the future. You'll have a nicer house, a nicer car, you'll do more exciting things in the workforce. And particularly for girls, look at this stat. If you're a girl and you're learning engineering and you understand this, you can almost call your shot. You can do so much, right? So it's critically important everybody gets this. And and that's because robotics and AI is going to be across all industries. So it doesn't matter. Like I know you guys, I assume the majority of the people that are listening are in engineering courses, which is awesome. But the cool thing is when you guys graduate, you'll be able to call your shot and get jobs in whatever industries are very interesting to you, the more knowledge that you get about this type of thing. And if you can combine, being a electrical engineer and robotics and artificial intelligence, that's going to be hugely in demand, right? So I'm giving a presentation in a few days' time to an industry in Canada, the heavy oil and gas industry. And that's interesting as well. I don't understand oil and gas, but I understand how robotics is going to change things. And you've got all these people with heavy oil and gas knowledge and experience, but they don't understand this new technology. So if you can combine those two knowledges, then really what you end up with is you make yourself incredibly valuable. And I do think that we will see artificial intelligence impact all careers. I was doing a course where I was teaching an introductory course to adults, and I had 7 engineers and 1 lawyer in the course. And the lawyer told me that it's getting very hard within the legal profession because AI is able to go through legal files and case precedents and emails and research unbelievably faster. So that used to be what you got your job with. If you were a junior lawyer in a firm, it was like, okay, I'm doing research, I'm prepping for the case. But now if there's technology to do that and you're a junior lawyer, how do you prove yourself? Right? So there's so many changes. And it comes down to each of us kind of understanding where we want to go, because we'll use robotics and technology to go into space, to go to Mars, to go inside volcanoes, deep into the ocean, into nuclear facilities that have had accidents. We're doing so many incredible things. We'll use robotics to go inside humans' bodies, right, to repair cell damage and all of these things. We're going to be doing so many incredible things over the next 10 years. And what should really excite you all is you're the people that are going to be doing it, right? You're the ones that are going to go out there and change the fabric of the world. I think one of the things that's important as well, while we're teaching and giving this robotics education to people, is that we talk about the morals and the ethical responsibility. One of my favorite things to do when I'm talking to students is say, okay, that you can get a robotic prosthetic now that you can control with your brain. It's not perfect, but it's improving, and it's getting better and stronger all the time. And so like your hand can know if you bump something and stuff, and you can actually get the hand to move by thinking about it. And so when the kids hear that, they're like, wow, that's awesome. So I'm like, okay, so imagine now that you had your hand, you lost your hand in an accident. Who thinks it would be a good idea to get a robotic prosthetic? 100% of the people I've asked that question to put their hand up. Everybody thinks it's a good idea. I'm like, okay, what if you got amputated at the elbow, and so now you have a robotic forearm, right, and a robotic hand? Who thinks that's still a good idea? Everybody. And then I'll say, what happens if your robotic forearm is hydraulic and it's 50 times stronger than a human's arm and hand? Now the person that got amputated has a significant advantage over you, right? So, do you think that if I got my arm amputated, I should be able to get a robotic arm that made me 50 times stronger than you? Who thinks that's a good idea? And the kids are now going, wait a second, that doesn't sound good. Now I'm disadvantaged. And then I say, okay, well, what happens if I decide I really like my powerful robotic arm? I want to amputate my arm on the left side and get 2 powerful robotic arms. And now everybody goes, this is wrong. Here was great. Here seemed good initially. This completely wrong. So we've got really tricky moral questions. And when we talk about things like neural links and those types of things, we could say, okay, who thinks it'd be better? It'd be great if people with Alzheimer's could improve their memory by 10 or 20%. Everybody thinks that's great. But now, who thinks it's great if you can upload a bunch of information into your brain and know everything? But some people don't want to do that, so they don't think that that's great anymore. So it's important that we think about the moral implications for this. So really, we're getting a little bit tight on time. I've gone on, which I tend to do. So what I want to do really quickly is just show you how we get people super excited about learning robotics and how we get these kind of numbers. So when you guys are going out and you start to reach out into the communities and talk to people and move forward, you can understand part of the challenges that we have. One of the reasons, and this might sound crazy, but one of the reasons that we get low engagement at the school level is because when we're teaching robotics, we're teaching it like it's an engineering course. We're putting that first rung of the ladder too high. What we need to do is we need to engage people and inspire them. And I've demonstrated robotics to 18,000 kids. And really what it comes down to is there's 3 elements we need to do to get kids excited about learning robotics. They have to know it's relevant and important. How will this impact me in my future and my careers? They have to be inspired. They have to think, hey, that looks really cool and fun. And then they have to also be confident. And this is where we lose so many kids in elementary or primary education and secondary education, because people are afraid. They're like, I don't understand that, I can't do it. So we have to build up that confidence in a big hurry. So I just want to show you what I show kids to get them excited here. I'm just going to connect to my robot. He is going to connect with Wi-Fi. So when I'm doing a presentation in a school, I'll talk for 5 or 10 minutes about all the cool ways that robotics is going to impact the world moving forward. And then I've got my robot. He's been standing there the whole time. He'll be turned on beforehand. And I'll say, I'll go for 5 minutes out of an hour, and I'll say, okay, we've got 55 minutes left. I can keep talking. I know lots about robotics. Or if you want, I can show you what this robot can do. And I know everybody wants to see the robot. He's been sitting there for 5 minutes with his eyes spinning. So I'll turn to it and I will say, JD, show me how strong you are. JD, show me how strong you are. And when I do this, all of a sudden we can hear all of the kids. Now they're moving around, they're shuffling in their desks. Now they're engaged. They're like, that person just talked to the robot. JD, what else can you do? Now what I'll tell you is I programmed these in about 20 minutes, and I'm no programmer. So if I can do this, honestly, like any fifth grader can do this. I'll ask if it's anybody's birthday, and if it's their birthday, I'll have them come up and sit right in front of the robot, and I'll say, JD, can you sing happy birthday? JD, can you sing happy birthday?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear human. Happy birthday to you. And many more.
And then if I'm talking to young kids, I'll say, JD's a bit of a young robot, not really sure what he is. Let's ask him a few questions and see if he knows. JD, are you a bird? So now when we talk about, remember those 3 things I said, you have to tell people it's relevant, show them how it's relevant to them. You have to inspire them. At this point in my presentation, all of the kids are like, can the robot do this? Can you do that? And they're really excited to learn more about the robot. The third thing is we have to give them confidence, and we have to do it fast, right? So what I'll do is for the next 45 or 50 minutes of my presentation, I'll have the students come up and volunteer to program this robot. I'll do the same routine for 10-year-olds as I will for 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds. And in 45 minutes, they can program this robot to wave, to talk. They record their voice and have it come out the robot, like when it was singing happy birthday. That happy birthday, incidentally, was programmed by an 8-year-old girl. It took her about 45 minutes to an hour, in that range, after she understood how to use the software. So it's very, very simple to program. And that's one of the big things to understand is robotics does not necessarily need to be hard. It can be very hard at the high end, but it can be very easy at the low end as well. So the kids will, they'll name the robot as well and give it a verbal command the same way I did. They'll have it tracking color, recognizing an object. That object will be a student's face. the robot will greet that student by name. And they program that all in 45 minutes. And all the way through, I will say to them, do you, I'll say, okay, you know, one student has just programmed the robot to wave, and I've got the software projected behind me so everybody can see what's happening. And I'll say, okay, that was a great job. That was pretty easy. Who could have programmed this robot to wave? And all the kids will put their hand up. And then when the robot talks, I'll say, who could have done that? And all the kids will put their hand up. And I'll make them admit that they could do it, or even to admit to themselves that they could do this all the way through the presentation. So at the end of the presentation, I'll say, okay, so everybody here can do everything that we've just seen this robot do. Recognize colors, people, talk, have a conversation. Everybody here can program all of that into this guy? Everybody will say yes. And then I will show them a video, and I just want to get that video, if you could play that for me. Piyush, that would be great. And here we go.
Yes, miss. What can I get from you?
White wine, please.
Coming right up, miss. How was your day, miss?
Pretty good, thanks. Busy, lots of meetings.
Sounds like a really long day, miss.
Now,
Yes, it was a long day.
when I show this video to people, a lot of times the adults are kind of like, oh my God, we've
Would you
gone
like
too
a
far.
menu as well?
Not right now, thank you.
And the robot is driving on an electric wheelchair base.
May I have your glass, please, miss?
Of course.
Thank you, miss.
You're welcome.
All right, Piyush, that'll do.
Here's your wine, miss.
Pause that now, or I guess I can pause that. Real good. Okay, thank you. So I'll show the kids that video. The kids will be freaked out by the robot. A lot of the adults will be freaked out by the robot. And so, because I've showed it on the screen behind me, it's life size. I'll say, okay, everybody here thought they could program this little robot. You all said you could. Who can program this big robot? And nobody will think that they can do it. And then I will tell them that big robot uses the exact same hardware and software as this little robot. And you all already told me you could program this little robot. So all of you could program this big robot. Let's look at what the big robot was doing. It was talking. Did you program your robot to talk? Yes, you did. So you could all program that. It was moving servos. Did you program your robot to move servos? Yes, you did. So you could all do that. The robot is listening to the lady. Did you program your robot to listen? Yes, you did. So you could all do that. In the first 45 minutes of working with this robot, you've all already shown me that you can do 75% of what is in this video. Now, it's important to understand that the students, the people that are watching this presentation, they don't know how to program the big robot. They don't know how to program this, but they know they can do it because they've done it and seen how easy it was. That is so critically important. When we make robotics really hard at the beginning, it scares a bunch of people away, right? So we have to make it super exciting, super easy. When we're teaching robotics, with this platform, you can program the robot with a Scratch language, Blockly, C++, Java, Python, or JavaScript rather. So there's lots of different languages. You can get a Wii remote, so you lift your arm, the robot will lift its arm. You can get augmented reality glasses, you move your head, the robot will move its head. This platform is incredibly powerful, but it's also incredibly easy to use. Right? If we start with an intimidating looking robot, the kids won't be interested. Or if we start with circuit boards and wires everywhere, that scares off a lot of kids here. Nobody's scared by a robot that can sing happy birthday, right? So this is a really important aspect when we're teaching this. If you're going out at some point in the future and talking to educators or teaching children robotics, just remember you have to keep it fun and engaging. One of the things I love to do when I've got this robot is we have a conversation with the robot. That is very exciting for kids and for adults. In fact, a lot of times I've trained hundreds of teachers on how to teach robotics, and sometimes they just get totally fixated on the speech recognition. And the nice thing about that is everybody's putting their personality into the robots. Some people are like, me robot, me smash. And some people are making a beautiful, caring robot. Everybody is able to project their own personality into their robot. And that builds a strong emotional connection. I remember the first time that my daughter, I think she was about 6 at the time, saw the robot do, I think it was a headstand. So I said, JD, what else can you do? He did the headstand. And she picked up the robot and she said, good job, JD, good job, girl. And my boys were like, that's not a girl robot, that's a boy robot. And she's like, no, it's a girl robot. And I was like, it's plastic. It's neither a boy nor a girl. But in my mind, for a moment, I was kind of freaking out because I was like, oh my God, my daughter just hugged a robot. My daughter is in love with a robot. And all my worst science fiction movie dreams were coming true right before my eyes. And then after a few minutes, I was like, wait a minute, wise up. Your daughter is engaged by the robot. She's not going to marry Barbie dolls or teddy bears, right? But she's got an engagement. She's got an emotional connection. And once we get that emotional connection, we can drive all kinds of education into her. Physics, math, biology, chemistry, we can do it all. With this platform, you can hook it up to ultrasonic, infrared, LiDAR, oxygen sensors, gyroscope, accelerometer. You can build things like self-balancing boards. Very powerful platform, very easy to use. And that's really a key with trying to get people engaged. So like when we talk about getting university kids engaged, if university kids, are looking at a robot that looks like a VEX robot or First Robotics robot, those can be great products. I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but they mostly appeal to people that are engineering minded, right? And so when we talk about those types of things, we have to remember there's a whole range of people over on this side as well. Let's give people robotics that everybody can enjoy. And then the people that are advanced, they'll take this robot apart and turn it into a whole bunch of other different things because it's modular. Eventually, they start to make things like that life-sized humanoid robot. And it was interesting to me, my son, who was a little bit older than my daughter, the first time he saw that life-sized humanoid robot video, he's like, oh my God, that's really cool. I'd love to make one of those. And I was honestly like, oh man, I'm going to have to make a life-sized humanoid robot because robotics is not my background, right? But an interesting thing had happened to me by that point. I'd been doing this for 5 or 6 years, and I had built up enough confidence with this guy that I was like, yeah, okay, we can do this, right? So I went through the same growth curve that the students go through when we reach the kids here, and then they start to get more excited, and then they get more engineering minded, and they get more confident. So the big takeaway here for me is the future is going to be totally change. It's going to totally change the workplace and society and our personal lives. People that have this literacy are going to be so advantaged both in their work life and their home life. And so we should try to get it to as many people as possible. And I've gone on really long, and I apologize for that. I tend to do that. So I would love to take some questions if anybody has questions.
I think, sir, even if we extended the time, the session was so interactive, and I personally learned so much about robotics. And more so, when we talk about the future of robotics, you rightly pointed out how overlapping the field of AI and robotics would be in the future. I mean, if we talk about healthcare or transportation or hospitality, each of these sectors would be in a way affected by robotics. So there is a need that we teach our young students to get them interested in robotics. And now we can proceed to the Q&A session, and I would request the participants to post their queries or questions in the comments box, and we'll be happy to answer them.
So just while they're doing that, most of my presentation so far has been talking about getting this education for kids or for young adults and stuff. But there's tens of millions of older adults that are going to need this education as well. And if we think the kids are afraid to learn this technology, man, the adults are even more afraid, right? So it's really important that we try to work with adults in all facets of our lives, our parents, our siblings, our cousins, to help them understand the scope of what is coming, because right now we all have time to get this education, and we have to start today in order to have a really nice, fantastic transition. Because I really believe that in 5 or 10 years time, we're going to be in an incredible new place, but it's going to be a tough 5 or 10 years for some people that don't have this knowledge. Okay.
I think we'll be getting more questions, but sir, to just start off the session, could you please share about your product as well? Because we could highlight on the solution part of it as to how students and even adults could learn about robotics. So, how does your platform teach robotics to young students?
Okay, so we have with this platform here. Just gonna turn this volume back down because I'm getting a little bit of a loop there, a feedback loop. With this platform, it's a modular platform. We will start kids in small class settings as young as 8 years old in full class settings of 30 or more kids. We don't typically recommend this platform until kids are grade 4, in that range, 10 years old. Certainly they can learn everything before that, but it's not, the classroom management becomes a challenge. If you've got a whole bunch of kids on robots and they accidentally close a window and didn't save, those types of things. So we need our students to have, at a young age, a good understanding of how to work a computer, because really that's what robotics is. Robotics is how your computer interacts with the world, right? And really AI is how your computer thinks. So those two fields go like this, right? So when we're working with real young students, we'll typically start with something like this guy. Now, if I'm demonstrating robotics and I'm trying to get high level of engagement, always the humanoid, right? Because this guy, we know the results there. They're incredible, right? And so, and it's interesting because a lot of times when I'm talking to educators, like I'll talk to a school that's been trying to get more girls into robotics education, trying really hard to do it, and they might get 100% increase. They'll go from 3 girls to 6 girls. And then I'll say, I can help you go up to 400 girls in a day, and they'll think that's impossible, but then I'll go in and I'll show them. This is why I've demonstrated robotics to so many kids, because a lot of times educators think those stats are impossibly high. So I have to go in and show them with their kids. Anyways, we'll use these guys for the real young kids, because this guy, with the 6 legs, he can't fall over. And we've also got a rover. And one of the things I think is a really neat exercise when we're teaching kind of older kids is we'll take a rover and we'll say, okay, your job is to pick up the mineral sample and put it in the back of the rover. So they'll drive it forward, close the hand, put it in the back. Once they understand what that process looks like, we'll put the rover in a different room or behind them. And we'll say, now make it happen. And all you have is your control panel, because that's what real world robotics looks like. In the real world, people aren't standing there watching the Mars rover. They've got the camera on the Mars rover. They've got a long delay while the signal goes to Mars and then comes back, right? So the process of real world robotics is often different than what we're teaching. So, one of the interesting things is if you have to make this robot pick something up, it's easy when you're looking at it as a third person, much different if you're looking at it in a first person. So maybe what you want is you're going to be wearing your VR goggles, and all of our robots have cameras built in. And so then you're going to look down with your head, look over a little bit, and then watch the hand pick it up, and then go back, and then maybe you're going to come back up here, turn this around. It's like there's lots of different possibilities that you can do. Or maybe you'll find that it's better if the camera's right on the gripper, right? I don't know, but the kids then will innovate, right? So what we like to do when we're teaching kids at an introductory level to start, we like to start with the 3 pre-designed robots. And I know a lot of times there's excitement about building the robots, and really right now these ship as a kit and the kids build them, but it takes 30 to 45 minutes. That's not the largest part of the education. And what we find is a lot of times schools have this much time, and there's this much education to give them. So if we put a whole bunch of building in there, then they don't get a whole lot of robotics time. So the building isn't a huge part for us. I also think it's easier to learn introductory robotics when the kids are working with familiar shapes, right? So I think it's easier to get that literacy if you're working with a humanoid because you understand how a humanoid body or human body works. Or a spider, that you've seen lots of spiders in your life. It's a familiar thing to you. Same thing with the rover, kind of has, it's on tracks, but it's kind of got the shape of a dog and stuff like that. So it's got a lot of familiarity with these. So what we try to do is we start by getting the kids literacy. We teach them introductory programming with these guys, kind of up to where they're learning if-else statements, variables, those types of things. And then what we want them to do next is take these things apart and innovate. So one of the things that's interesting with this robot is its hip joint goes forward and back, its knee joint goes forward and back, the ankle will pivot. But that means for the robot to walk, he kind of has to pivot himself up, go forward, and then kind of go down. So he walks a little bit Frankensteinish, frankly. So then what I like to do is I like to say to the kids, okay, let's put another servo in here that goes sideways so the robot can kick its leg out sideways. How does that change things? Because now the robot can slalom, so it could do a much smoother walk. But the center of gravity is higher. So now if the robot wants to do push-ups, he has too much weight too far forward from his feet, so he has a harder time getting up. So everything changes, right? So we like to start with something that is known, then start changing up some variables so the kids start to understand, some basic physics. One of the really interesting things is when we teach robotics with this platform, the way we program movements is we have a visual interface, and then the kids are, adjusting the angle of a servo. And here, I'll show you rather than just tell you. I'll share my screen. Okay, share screen. You're going to get some feedback here for just a second, so you'll have to bear with me until I close this down. Just want to make sure that it's going to work. In theory, you guys should be seeing my screen, but can you see my screen, Piyush?
Yes.
There we go. Just a little bit slow. Oh, it was coming up there for a second. Okay. So now I'm going to show you my software. I'll show you how we program movements on this robot. My software is a little bit slow because it's running the webinar for me here as well. So here's a picture of my robot standing. And if I was the robot and we wanted me to wave, it would look like this. And we reverse engineer that movement. Okay, so let's look at the pivot points. I started like this. I put my hand up, pivoted out here, pivoted back, out, and down. So there's really 3 frames or pivot points we need. He's already standing. We've got that one. So we'll make a new frame. We'll call this AA Wave 1. And now each of the boxes here with a number inside, that box refers to a servo, one of the motors on the robot. The number is the angle the servo's at. So this is really great at reinforcing math and stuff. If we want the robot to move, we change the angle in the box, and you'll notice the robot's moving in real time. Then I can make another new frame. It's called Wave 2. Put the robot's arm out here, open up the gripper. Now I've got this frame, and this frame. So I can put those together into a sequence. And I'm ripping through this. I'm trying to be fast so I can get to more questions, but I just want you to see it because it's important because this is so easy, anybody can do it. And this is how we hook all the people that aren't necessarily engineering minded. And a lot of people can learn it. It's just they have to have that confidence early. So I've made a new action called AA Wave 1. Over here on the right side of the screen is where my script is going to be. And I'm just going to make a script that says, I've made an error in my script already. I'll have to fix that in a second. So I want it to go stand, wave 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, stand. So it's going stand, 1, 1, 2, 2. So I'm going to move this up. So now I have stand, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, stand. I'll hit save. And I'll make my robot perform this action. So this is what I just programmed. Right, it took 3 minutes. It's super easy. And this is why people can program push-ups and stuff in 20 minutes. They can program the robot to do a somersault in an hour. But an interesting thing happens because you're working with angles a lot. So this is really incredible for building strong visual spatial skills. And we work with somebody here locally that has a double doctorate in math and learning environments, and she will use this robot for people that have been diagnosed as having visual spatial deficiencies. And she says the difference in a week is amazing, because here's what I want to point out. Like, let's say my arm is at a 45-degree angle. Now, I'm going to keep my arm at a 45-degree angle. I'm going to pivot my shoulder. So all of that is a 45-degree angle for the servo when the axis changes. So all of a sudden, kids start being able to visualize angles on top of axes, and it really helps them be able to build strong visual models in their mind, which is incredibly important for building strong mathematical skills, right? So, and then we've also got things like, I'll just show you this really quickly because I think it's important to understand. We've got, this is the kind of scripting we want our kids to learn, so it's not just all fun and games with the visual interface, right? We get kids learning real scripting, text-based scripting. And what we found actually is we can start kids on the text scripting as young as 10 years old, and they all have success with it. The important thing is that the output of the robot has to be cool enough for them to want to learn all of the textual commands, right? So, but they all want to when the robot talks to them and recognizes them and greets them by name. You can also hook this robot up to Microsoft's artificial intelligence, their cognitive vision and cognitive emotions. So you can start programming those types of functionality into this little robot. So there's basically nothing you can't do. So we start kids on the visual interface, build them up, get them text coding, and getting them to the point where they're using sensors and understanding really complex robotic thinking.
And I think the idea that the robot is in the real world actually reinforces a lot of the confidence that the students have. And it also supports, in a way, as you said, their mathematical and like scientific knowledge, which is a boost to their academics as well. So I think we have some questions and we are going to take them up.
I'll try to answer them faster.
Yeah. So the first question is, as we talk about robotics in healthcare, how trustworthy it would be to put a machine in place of a surgeon?
The best thing that I can say about that right now is I would sure want there to be a really good surgeon behind the machine. In the future, as we get things more proven out, we'll start to see that happening less and less. But I guess this is it really comes down to running statistics and stuff. Here's the thing: how many people can be really great brain surgeons? But if you build a really great brain surgeon robot, you can have a really great brain surgeon in every town across the country, right? And so if you're sitting there and you have two choices, I can wait for a really long time to visit the one brain surgeon in my province, or I can go to the machine and it might save my life. People are going to want to go to that robot, right? So, this is one of those things that is very interesting because robotics will bring increased healthcare across the world. The IBM's Watson is already as good or better at diagnosing many illnesses, right? And so one of the really interesting things is, you can have 52 symptoms and the doctor's only testing for 5 of them, and he doesn't know that if you get all 52 of these symptoms, this is what it is. But the machine can know that every time, right? So for diagnoses and stuff, it's going to be better. But in terms of a surgeon at this point, I certainly would want to have a person behind that. In the future, we might find that that's not important. Same kind of thing with robotic trucks, right? If I'm driving down the highway and I look over and I've got a robotic truck beside me, I'm accelerating and getting the heck out of there. But in 5 years' time, after everybody knows, okay, robotic trucks are way less prone to be in accidents than trucks driven by people, and we'll certainly get there. The statistics are already very good, but we'll certainly get to the point where it's much better. And one of the other interesting things as well is, supposing you needed brain surgery and I'm a world-renowned brain surgeon and I'm the only one that can do it, I can be in Calgary, Canada, and you can be in India, and I can be doing the surgery. right? So that's another great way that it's going to help out with healthcare.
I think okay. The next question is what is the future of robots in the defense sector? So I think this is also very interesting.
Certainly, I mean, the use of robots and technology in defense is going to be unprecedentedly large. You know, where then you already see it. You see smart missiles. You see missiles that it can intercept missiles. You can have drones. There's sound wave technology that they can beam sound at you and it can disrupt things. The use of technology in terms of defense is going to be unprecedentedly large. But this goes back to my comment about morals and stuff. Are we going to trust a robot or artificial intelligence to be making life and death situations or decisions? And, you know, I think the early answer is certainly that the majority of people don't feel comfortable with that. I think there's a number of engineers who would feel comfortable with that. I've seen videos of people trusting the AI is not going to hurt them in a self-defense type of a situation. And so, you know, it's going to be a bit of a slow march, but really what it comes down to, and this is partly my comment about wanting everybody to understand robotics. You know, an interesting thing happens when we look at social media and stuff. Okay, so some really creative programmers create fantastic social media sites, and politicians and regulators don't understand those sites, and the public don't understand those sites. And so what happens is social media gets to run rampant for several years or decades, as has happened, before people go, wait a minute, what do you mean you could use social media to influence elections? Wait a minute, what do you mean? Like if I'm here and you're in India, we could type in the exact same question on Google and get two totally different answers, right? So, and we could get different answers depending on what I've put into the system, right? So really, I'm digressing a bit, but I want to bring it back around here. What is critically important as we consider the power of robotics and artificial intelligence, it's incredibly powerful. Will it be used in defense? Absolutely. But what we need is as we go through this transition and things get to be more robotic and artificial intelligence, it's important that all of humanity has a seat at the table about how we're going to use this technology, what this technology is going to become. You know, when I talk about the prosthetics, I recognize that I'm talking about that. My opinion is no more valid, and my concerns or lack of concerns is no more valid than the concerns of all the people in the classroom. So an interesting aspect would be, just to take this away from defense for a second, let's talk about robotics and nanobots going into the body, right? I mean, okay, that could be fantastic. There's a lot of people that are afraid to take vaccines right now because they're afraid of what's in the vaccines, right? And so the same thing is going to happen with robotics and AI. The people that are uneducated, that don't understand the issues, will have a natural fear. And so what we want, I'm not saying we don't want people to be afraid of the things we're going to do, but what we want is for people to be educated about the things that we're going to do, so they have rational fear or lack of fear based on having a concrete understanding. And when we do that, we can have a conversation about what humanity becomes. Because if we only have a small sector of people that understand this technology, they will determine what humanity becomes, right? And so it's, when we talk about defense, this is a really important part of it. Do we want, you know, the quote unquote killer drones? You know, there's a lot of people that certainly wouldn't. We need to have an understanding of that. And there's some people that would say, yes, we need those to defend ourselves because our enemies have killer drones, right? So like all technologies, it will be used to the maximum it can be in all areas. And we just have to have a broad understanding of morals and ethics and have a broad range of opinions as we navigate through these changes. I need to unmute you there. Okay.
Since this is extremely important and talk about ethics and privacy, and the changes that would be in the future due to the incoming of technology such as robotics and AI. So, how do you think we can embrace these changes? Because surely the world is going to change, whether we like it or not. But how do we make sure that we are in the right direction for humanity globally?
Well, and yeah, I think that goes back to making sure that everybody understands this. We can't afford to have a situation where our political leaders don't understand what's happening with this technology. The economic and social impacts are going to be enormous, right? There are going to be big winners and losers over the next 10 years. A great example of this will be, for example, over in North America, and this might be the same in India, there's a lot of talk about, maybe there'll be a universal basic income, right? Okay, well, all these people are going to lose their jobs. There's a big pivot in thinking about what humanity is. Maybe everybody gets a universal basic income so everybody can live to a good level. But where is that money coming from, right? And like what's going to happen is it's going to get relatively territorial. So an example I like to use today, this is real world information. My company uses a product called Zoho CRM. And I believe Zoho is an Indian company. I'm not positive about that. I've never looked it up, but I think that's the case. But so every month my company goes, here's $700. That $700 goes to India, to an Indian company, if that's correct. And then the Indian government taxes that Indian company. And now they've got $300 or $200 or however much to distribute amongst the people. And so if every company in North America starts doing that, now India's got a lot of money coming in. So India's going to do okay. But now imagine what happens if, and I'm not picking on any country here. We'll just say, okay, well, we'll say China because that's a concern, but I'm not trying to pick on China. Suppose that the Chinese really come on strong with artificial intelligence and robotics. And they start making all of these new apps, these artificial intelligence programs and robotics, and the rest of the world is buying that stuff, and all the money flows in there, right? Again, China does great. The other countries don't do as good. So it's going to be critically important for each country to make sure they have an ample supply of high-tech people in order for their economy to do well, in order to support the people that have had the misfortune of having their jobs eliminated, in order to retrain the people who have had their jobs eliminated. One of the interesting things that we see in a lot of parts of the world is about, okay, so here's some simple and easy math, and it's not exactly right, but it's close enough. If 40% of jobs are going to be eliminated, it is reasonable to say that 40% of the people that graduate from our high schools only have enough knowledge to take those exact jobs that are going away. So every year, we're going to have a pool of low technical skill labor that is unemployed looking for jobs, and the competitive nature of those low-paying, low-skilled jobs is going to be horrible. So all of these people will be fighting for low-paying jobs, and then every year our high school drops a whole bunch more people in here that haven't gotten a strong enough education. And and this is a little bit of a deviation, but it's an interesting thought. Now, I love this with teachers because teachers, of course, have all gone to university. But I love to say this. I'll say to teachers in university, and you guys may be in this exact situation. You guys are going to get through this in time, so it's not going to affect you, but it will affect your younger siblings or your children. Imagine a situation where, okay, so I'll talk to the teachers. I'll say, okay, so you've all gone to university, right? And they'll all go, yeah, of course, they're teachers. And I'll say, okay, how many of you worked your way through university? And usually 70% of hands will go up. I'm like, okay, so 70% of you had a job while you went to university. How many of you could not have afforded to go to university if you didn't have a job? Usually about 30% of hands will stay up. I'm like, what kind of jobs did you guys all have? Worked in restaurants, retail, like all low-tech skill jobs. So I'm like, okay, so if you couldn't go to university without your job, and you're graduating from high school without high-tech skills, you guys aren't going to get a job that's going to allow you to go to university. Now, you're all smart people. You've all graduated from university. You're all going into this unemployment pool. It's a huge, this is a huge paradigm change that it will affect all aspects of society, right? And so as a result, all people have to learn that. And really what it comes down to is, from a humanities perspective, we are best served if everybody understands this. It's going to make it economically better, which is going to reduce social disparity and social issues like depression, crime, all of those things that go up when unemployment rises, right? So those things are going to be important. But it's important to also understand that even within India, some provinces are going to go after this very fast. Some will go very slowly. Some cities will go fast and some will go slowly. The places that are investing today in intellectual infrastructure will have a massive advantage economically in the next 5 to 10 years. Massive.
Indian international multinational company. So definitely there would be a massive global change in terms of economics and the job pool that we'll be having. And, yeah, so we can take the next question. There's a question related to robotic farming. So somebody says, robotic farming, please explain. So I think, is there some role of robotics in the agriculture sector?
Huge. Okay, so some examples would be, you can get intelligent watering of your farm. You could be taking soil samples or moisture samples. Moisture samples to determine where you need to water, where you don't need to water. You could be taking soil samples to go, oh, this particular part of land is really low on nitrogen, over there is okay, right? We'll have artificial intelligence to help us manage crops better, so we're not just stripping so much nutrition from the planet. Here's a great story that is, this is a real world thing. I was doing a presentation at a small rural school in a town of about 600 people. So I was doing they had gotten some robots. I was doing a presentation. One of the students put their hand up and told me about his thriving business with his drone, taking images and video of farmers' fields. And that job had previously been done by an adult with an airplane. An adult with an airplane was being put out of business by a teenager with a drone, right? Incredible. A nice clap for the person that's got the drone. Really hard for the person when you've got an airplane to pay off, right? One more example of how we all have to understand how these changes will affect everything. This goes back to the whole business management thing. If you want to go into business, you should understand artificial intelligence and robotics to make good decisions. But going back to the agriculture question, they've got robots that can sort fruit well. I've heard stories of, I've never seen, sensors that are so sensitive that they can smell when fruit is ripe, right? So you could have robotic picking machines, and they're not great yet, but it won't be long until they're great, right? And so we're going to see changes in how fruit and orchards are done. We're going to see changes in crops. You already can get GPS-controlled combines and tractors. And in the future, you won't probably even need to be in it. But if it breaks down, you're probably going to want to know how to service it, right? So, and certainly I wouldn't present myself as a robotics agriculture specialist by any stretch, but those are some of the obvious ways it's going to impact it.
And I think even when I read about new technologies in farming, when we read about vertical farming or maybe hydroponics, so a lot of that automation is governed by the use of robots. So these new young age entrepreneurs, they do not want to include a lot of manpower, rather they want to make the process very efficient. So since we are talking about robotics, robotic process automation is also one of the key aspects which would impact robotics in the future. Uh, since we've been talking about education a lot, I also posted the link to the site Robots.Education, of which our speaker is the founder, and you can of course go visit and do try to get involved in robotics as soon as possible, because the early you start, the better it is. And the majority of our audience is school and college going students, so I think this session must have been very fruitful, meaningful, and I've learned a lot about robotics and the impact it will have in the future from this session. So I was personally very excited to hear from Sir, even from the previous discussions that we had on robotics. I really enjoyed the session, and I hope even our audience did, because this was one of those very enlightening moments. And I think in the next 5 years or so, we'll see that turning point in the future.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your knowledge with us and your views and insights. And it has been a great pleasure. And
Thank you.
now I would also like to thank the audience who have been very interactive and supportive throughout the session. I know we exceeded the time limit a bit, but I think the session has been very engaging and exciting. So all of you would be gaining a lot of insights from it. And just one last announcement, please make sure that you fill the feedback link and get your attendance. I've also put it in the chat box, and I'll put it in the video description as well later. So thank you so much for joining, everybody. Uh, Hope to see you again.
Thank you. Have a great